Hi, everyone. This is Blaine Birch, CEO at Dryrun and your host of Turning Point Podcast, stories and strategies from the world of business. And joining me today, I'm really excited. There's a longtime friend, Mark Ryski. Mark is the CEO at Headcount. And we've been, of course, talking business on the various patios for years and years and years. And in fact, the other day, I was actually thinking, like, how long have I known Mark? And we're probably got to be up close to the 20-year mark. I'm thinking. So it's
17 years. 17 years.
So okay, man, that was quick. You got better math than I do, but it's
data guy.
So it's been a while.
Data guy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, this is a long time coming, and like you said earlier, before we kind of got online here, it's almost like a continuation of our usual talks about business, but now we've got just a bigger room full of entrepreneurs that are hanging out and chatting with us. So that's really cool. But I know kind of where you come from, but every time we talk, you've got some more interesting stories that I've never heard, and so I want to dive back to like where you got started in business. What was your first step into business that really rings a bell with you?
Well, yeah, good. Good question. I've my background is marketing, and I've worked for various companies, and I've spent some time in retail as well. But my last job before becoming an entrepreneur was working for the software maker Intuit. And some of the viewers may know Intuit as Quicken and TurboTax and QuickBooks. Well, I was the director of the small business division for Canada. So QuickBooks and all the related QuickBooks services, payroll and all the services were part of my responsibility. And so ironically, I didn't really set out to be an entrepreneur, but the company I worked for built tools for entrepreneurs, which was an interesting perspective to get. And after about an 8-year terrific career with Intuit, I got to a point in my career, like so many other entrepreneurs, where you just sort of decide, what should I do next? And, strangely, I need to hang my own shingle up and be my own business. I was never really wired that way. I was quite content working within larger corporate environments. But I just thought there's a market opportunity that I think needs to be addressed that isn't being addressed. Just like most entrepreneurs' stories start,
Yeah.
like what was the, necessity, mother of invention and all the rest of that. But it really had to do with helping retailers understand how many people are visiting their stores and providing them with some analytics to help them make better decisions. That was really the crux of it. And so I decided to strike out on my own. And it was a scary, like many entrepreneurs will tell you, it's sort of a scary thing to do. You're leaving a big, successful company, a great career. It was a wonderful place to work.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just nothing quite like going and scratching your own itch, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of the comments I know you've made that always rings in the back of my head. You always say it's like we're like dogs off a leash. We can never go back, and it's true. You just get that bite of being an entrepreneur and trying to, and it's not as much the freedom because you know how many hours and everything. Like there is not a lot of freedom. It's this this drive and this building something that is just like this necessity that I think entrepreneurs have, and then of course a completely blind eye to risk. That's always seems to go with it.
You know what, Blaine, we have to be oblivious. And it's sort of like, if you think too hard about the perils of doing this, we would never move forward. And so, there's got to be a certain amount of obliviousness that I think every entrepreneur needs to take with them. But the only thing that I would say is we also have to be very careful that our vision and delusion are very close. And it's really hard to tell the difference sometimes that you actually have a vision for where you're trying to go or just a delusion. And it's I spend a lot of time talking to myself with different voices, and I imagine many entrepreneurs do too.
Always do. So you talked about seeing an opportunity in retail. Where was your? Did you have like a single like aha moment, or what was it where you went, there's an opportunity? How did you find an opportunity when you're working at Intuit and you're managing all this to see an opportunity there that now has turned into a massive journey and a terrific business?
Well, the reality is the journey started all the way back in early 1990s. So I didn't just get the idea at Intuit. what had happened was I worked in retail when I was going to university, finishing my my commerce degree. And so I worked in retail stores, and one retail operation that I worked for was a computer store, and they had computer and software. I know this is hard for people watching this podcast, but that's how you used to buy software in stores along with computers, which a desktop computer at the time would cost $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000. Anyway, here's the point. I was the marketing manager for this software retailer and computer goods retailer. And I was in charge of putting out the advertising and driving the business. And we would put these marketing programs in place. We'd run advertisements and do radio remotes, like live on site, XYZ, come down to our store, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what would happen is we'd run these promotions, and at the end of the day, the owner of the store would basically count the money in the till. And he would say, you know what, Mark, I mean, that was just okay. I thought this promotion would be better, and let's try something else next time. And so that's what really bugged me. And this is where it started. I said, well, hold on just a second. The advertising and marketing that we're doing can only do one thing for retail, and that's drive opportunities, drive people into the store. Once they get there, what I observed were people wandering around. All our associates were tied up, and we had like 25 of them. So it's not like we didn't have staff, but the store would get very, very busy. Well, people would wander around because it was a high involvement, expensive and complex purchase. They'd have to talk to somebody, but they'd just leave without buying because they couldn't get served. And then I thought, what, I'm getting held to the results in the till, but yet I can see my job was really to bring people into the store. That's where I just decided I got to count how many people come in the store. Now, it sounds like a basic, silly idea, but it's so basic. It's also so important. And that's where traffic counting started with me. And then when I looked at it and I said, well, you need to know how many people came in and what percentage of those people actually bought, or what is the conversion rate. That's how Headcount really got started. And so I decided I wanted to do that this was important to have. In 1994, I went trolling around as best I could to try to find somebody that had an electronic traffic counter, and I couldn't easily find anyone. And it was not easily searchable on the internet in 1994 either, by the way.
Yeah.
But I did find a company that sold an electronic traffic counter. I tried to buy one. So I went to my boss and said, I'd like to buy this device. It costs $2,500. And here's how we'll use it and why it's important. And the words still sting after all these years. The owner said, Mark, $2,500? You could do another radio remote for $2,500. I don't think you should buy a traffic counter. Now, just for context, at the time, we were spending about $250,000 a year on advertising. So it wasn't a small advertising budget. Yeah. And I said, this $2,500 will help us understand if we're spending the $250 the right way. And I still couldn't convince him. So I just said, I'm going to build one on my own. And I went to a couple of the students that worked in the same store that were engineering students at the university. And I said, can you build me a basic traffic counter? And that's how Headcount started. Yeah. The problem was I couldn't sell many of those back in the day. And Headcount, the first version, basically failed. I would try to sell it to other retailers, and they would tell me the same thing my owner told me, and that was $2,500. And so I just let it slide. I didn't do anything with it. And then after my career at Intuit, I realized people still weren't tracking traffic after all these years. This was more than a decade later. And I just said, what if we do it as a recurring service? Because at the time, everybody was trying to build SaaS businesses or recurring service businesses. Yeah. And I thought if we could remove the cost of capital of buying traffic counters and do the work, helping these retailers use and apply the insights, that's what I thought the innovation would be. And that's when I made the decision to leave Intuit and try to build it from there.
Yeah. And the key words that I heard there was helping them use the insights. So that was the big observation I think was so important, that it wasn't just, it's just not counting traffic. It's that you're actually figuring out, how do you apply it? How do you use that $250,000 budget better? Like stores that are doing traffic counting probably even today aren't applying that if they're not talking to you guys. So I'm just a little plug there, but I know it's true. So it's, so now you've sort of left into it. Now you're into V2. Very different approach, but how did that start to gain steam for you?
Well, it was a tough slog. I thought that immediately retailers would just see the brilliance of this service offering. So it would be a no-brainer until I started to knock on the doors of retailers, and it wasn't that at all. What I got from these retailers was, why would I want to track traffic? Or what is this going to tell me I don't know? Or anything. I mean, the point was they didn't get it and they still didn't see why they ought to do it. And that's when I realized I had a real problem. I think the market really needs this data and these insights, but they don't know that yet. And that set me on a course to try to figure out how to do that best. And so out of a fit of frustration, I basically said, well, to myself, nobody's really told the story of why traffic and conversion data is so important for retailers. I mean, read books on retailing and textbooks on retailing. Nobody speaks of this in any great extent, or they didn't at the time. So I said, what if I wrote a book about it? Literally, what if we write the book on traffic and conversion? What if we? I always say me because I include my team in everything. And so that's what I did on evenings and weekends. So during the day, I'd scratch on doors and try to sell traffic counting. And on evenings and weekends, I would try to write a book. I had no clue how to do that, but I just said, put your ideas down on paper and figure out how to get published. Yeah. So it took a year from my first word on paper to having a physical copy of a book in my hand. And my intention and my strategy from the start was very simple. I was going to start sending copies of this book to CEOs of retail chains and try to see if I could engage them directly. And a funny thing happened. It actually worked. So I would send a book out directly to a CEO. Then I would call up his or her office and just say, hi, it's Mark Ryski, the author of When Retail Customers Count. I was just calling to make sure you received the copy of the book I sent you. Great. I'd also like to set up a time to talk about how the ideas in the book could apply to your chain. And business, I'll say, took off. It was hard slogging, but became a lot easier. And that's really how Headcount really got started.
Yeah. So you're educating a market, really. You're bringing ideas to them. And I remember, of course, I remember your first book and, your second book as well. But I remember you talking about this tactic where you just send out a book and you reach out to them after, and how that got you through those doors to CEOs in big corporations, because I'm sure there's so many businesses out there. That's a wall that is hard to get through. And you found a way that was just like a beeline in, which I think was so clever, not only in getting through, but also having an outcome where it's like, I'm actually teaching them what they need to know so they'll buy my service. What year did your first book come out?
The first book came out in 2005.
2005. Okay.
2005. So I know that goes back a long way. I mean, and then we just dealt with the business and kept, working it. And I realized this is really a great strategy, but there's so much more we now know about this that I ended up writing a second book. And we started, sending that out to the retailers that didn't respond, or sending out to ones that we already were working with. The point is, it continued on. It helped us reach even new clients and continue to grow even more.
Yeah. So that was, I guess that was a massive tactic for you guys, like a big push for you. So now that you actually started to get people like interested, they're talking with you, you're starting to get clients. What did you do on the business side to now start like offering the value, offering the service? Like, cause now they're starting to get clients. I'm sure there must've been challenges too. And suddenly, wow, we got one. Now, how do we serve them? How do we offer value? How do we price? How do we expand our team? Like, what were some of the challenges that came up with that?
Well, all those things started to happen. I mean, we create these businesses and almost our singular focus is to acquire clients. And sometimes that happens before our offerings are completely cooked or baked or refined, or, it's understandable how it happens. This is how we learn to refine our products and services. And so it's that bumping and grinding, and it feels like thrashing around and dropping balls and trying to, that's all part of learning. That's all part of figuring out what your offering is, figuring out, what your offering is, but where the customer's valuing what you're bringing, and then how to deliver that, and then how to scale that, and how to do it profitably. Those are all the subsequent challenges that come along, but revenue has to come first. I mean, you have to be able to generate some kind of cash flow. Speaking of cash flow, cash is like altitude in an airplane. And when that revenue stops, you better have some cash in the bank. Otherwise, your plane is going to go down. And so that's why, not to, you know, I don't mind plugging it, because cash flow and the work that you do at Dryrun and that your group does, hey, I'm a fan because I've learned it the hard way. Like most, and I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but
You can digress on this all you want.
yeah, well, my point is, you know, it's a series of barriers as an entrepreneur you have to get past.
Yeah.
But, you know, solving that, is there a need for what you have? Will the market exchange money for the value? And you have to come to you have to come to terms with that.
Yeah.
And what can really fake you out as an entrepreneur is one client values something and you think, oh, that's it. But then the next client doesn't value that at all. They value a different aspect or perspective on your service. And you sort of go, well, what is it that, who values what? And it can be sometimes a bit confusing that you go, I figured it out. And rarely, in my experience, have I figured it out. I figured it out for that moment. But so it's just an ongoing, it's a journey, man. That's the reality. It's a journey.
It's that 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sort of like, well, like Josh Patrick, one of our earlier guests, he said 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. At the 4 steps is where you learn. That was a great quote.
I agree. I certainly, the hardest, the hard knocks are the ones you don't forget.
Yeah. So you had talked about, you changed your model to in sort of V2 to a recurring revenue model, but now you still have like you still had, you know, trying to convince them to basically like buy traffic counters, or did you still have that challenge? Because that was basically your first challenge. How did you kind of figure out how to get that friction out of the way of your clients so that they could really get down to the meat?
Yeah, well, it was a tough problem to solve. And just for everybody's context here, so we install cameras, a little device at the front entrances of retail stores. And that's how we actually monitor right down to the minute how many people come in. These are top-down cameras, so we're not taking facial recognition or no privacy concerns, but we can very accurately measure how many people come in right down to the minute. And we report on results to the hour. So we still need to put a camera in these stores. Now, at one point I thought, oh, well, I'll just roll it into my service. So the retailer doesn't have to buy it, because you got to buy the camera. There's a cost there. Then you have to install it. That's installing structured cabling, and it's got to connect to your infrastructure. So there's costs involved here. That was a barrier. And I thought, well, if we could just roll it all in, that's when I discovered cash flow and the importance of, because I could buy all this equipment that consumes a bunch of my cash.
Yeah.
And then I put it in on a monthly service that I only get $50 or $60 or $90 a month for.
Yeah.
Well, guess what happens to your cash? You run out of it. And so I started down that path and then said, this is not sustainable. Yeah, the market may want this, but I can't do this.
Yeah.
And so I had to get past that and realize that you have to know that if that client, that prospective customer you're trying to go after, if they don't have the capital to actually afford the service. So today you have to buy the camera and pay for the installation up front. You just have to. And then our service is on top of that, and that recurs. If they just don't have the wherewithal to do that, then that's not a client that I can form an economic relationship with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all. You have to say, who can I do business with or not?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to qualify and find out, like, are they the right fit? But that's the thing, is you came up with a model that works. It's like, it's like your setup fee. You have to pay that, and then we can get going on this and offer. But I imagine that also makes them a little bit stickier, because they've committed. Now they're in, they believe in it. They've committed to the hardware. That probably, I'm guessing, helps keep them engaged with you.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, you tell me. I have clients that have been on our recurring, they're paying us every month, and they've been on our service for over 15 years. So you tell me whether that's a pretty good sign of success, because I'd say in the SaaS world, if you get somebody to lifetime value 15 years. Now, I wish all my clients were that long. I'm just saying that's really what you're trying to solve for in a recurring service business. Acquiring up front, but it's about long lifetime value and really preserving, maintaining, and evolving the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Just curious. I don't know if this is, if I'm trying to get into trade secrets, just, just ignore me. But, what I'm a little bit curious about is you've got the traffic counting. So you know what the traffic's coming in. You want to merge that or get some insights on their sales. So how do they they must get you must sort of work together to actually see the sales data and mix it with your traffic data to be able to report on that?
So yeah, the answer is yes. So the traffic count data comes to us directly, automatically, so that we can
Okay.
validate it, do hygiene. But then the retailers send us a second stream of data on a secure stream of all their transaction counts, right down to the hour. They'll send us labor schedules, marketing calendars. You can imagine all the other pieces of data that you would want to mash together with traffic and conversion data. And so, yes, we're very tightly aligned with our clients. They send us all this data. We mash it together, produce reports for the stores, regions, districts, right up to the executives. And we serve that reporting out every morning. And so
Yeah.
we have push reporting, we have a mobile app, we have a data portal. So in all forms, it goes from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where that true value that you talked about before comes in. It's not just the traffic, it's actually it's the insights that they can actually take action on and move the needle. And that's where that value comes. And that's why you have customers for 15 years that stick around. And that's of course in the SaaS world, that's like 15 years. That's outstanding. That's something you want to see. I know one of our longest clients we had, when we hadn't even launched Dryrun. I had launched a static prototype and put basically a payment page up and got $20 out of them a month. And we still got some of those clients. And it's really cool to see that like Dryrun has gone from to a completely different place. And we literally built the software after the fact, and we still have some of those clients. That's just really, kind of fun to see. And I've never made them pay anymore. So, because it's like, those guys are heroes to me. So, so one of the things I actually wanted to kind of get into, because I have you at like every day when I'm on LinkedIn, I see you talking about retail, and you've got comments on retail. Seems like every single day. Maybe it is every single day. For those of you who are listening, just to give you a little bit of context, we are in September 2020, so we are in just the absolute middle of the pandemic. Retailers, at least in North America, and from what we understand, further afield than that, are open-ish, sort of open, kind of open, maybe open, but I imagine their traffic is down because people have to wear masks and there's all these other concerns. Let's dive into that a little bit. Like, this is, you are one of the world leading retail experts, and this has got to be a challenging time for that industry, maybe more than a lot of others.
Yeah, it's utter disruption. And I do think it's important to mark this time in history. We're going to look back on this. I mean, we're going through our version of the bubonic plague, and we're trying to build companies, keep people employed, and keep the show running. Think about it. We measure how many people go into brick and mortar stores. A lot of them are closed or starting to reopen. But when the pandemic hit, there was a couple of months where they were just closed, period.
Yeah.
So that has a bunch of consequences for us. Obviously, my future in the company, my company's future is tied to the future of brick and mortar retailing. And so you have some retailers that are deemed to be essential, and it's gangbusters. And so now more than ever, they need to know how many people are coming so they can align their staff and make sure they have enough services and support to serve those customers. And then you have the other group, which is they're failing terribly. And in fact, several of my own clients, large clients at that, went bankrupt in the last 2 weeks. And so this is the reality I'm facing and my company's facing, which is causing us to really have to reflect on what does store traffic and conversion analytics mean in an environment where the amount of traffic going into the stores is dramatically diminished. The fact that people are venturing out to shop, they're going there deliberately to buy. So improving conversion rates, I mean, just sell to the people coming in the store. I mean, it changes how we need to think about our offering. And it's really a defining moment for us as a company.
Where, Like there does seem to be this strange combination of like winners and losers right now. Like you said, some are essential services, or they're almost overwhelmed with traffic, um, and then there's so many that it's just they're struggling mightily. They're cut back. Is there some sort of sense of like where? Let's jump forward a couple of years from now. What's going to be left in that because retail stores are the bricks and mortar are still going to be there for some, but some I think are going to be replaced. What is your sense? Do you think some of the winners are going to come from? Who's going to be challenged the most?
Yeah. Well, here's what I believe to be absolutely true. There's going to be a hell of a lot less retailers, period. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'll tell you why. That North American retail has been overbuilt. When you look at the amount of retail square footage we have in North America per capita compared to other countries, it's ridiculous. There's so much retail square footage in North America. It's overbuilt. And so the reality is some of these chains going away are a bit of retail Darwinism, that they ought to go away, that the demand for those products will be consumed and subsumed by the other retailers that exist. So the strong ones are going to get stronger. Target, Walmart, obviously the Amazon effect. But I don't want anyone to believe that it's Amazon killing brick and mortar retail. They never were. That's a narrative that gets played out, and no question, online and Amazon has led the charge, but this isn't about that. So to your question, the biggest players, the most successful ones, they're going to get stronger. And that doesn't mean all little ones are going away. There's plenty of little retailers that have really operated, and not just mom and pops, but small regional chains and local players that, you know what have done? They've managed their cash really well. They don't have debt. They're good, solid operators, and they're going to take a hit, but they're going to come through on the other side, and their customers are going to need them even more. And so,
Yeah.
But there is an entire recalibration going on in the brick and mortar retail industry. And it's hard to say exactly how long this is going to take to shake out, or, when we'll know we arrive. I think it's going to take years for this to shake out. I really do.
Yeah. And I guess like, back in the, like you are familiar with it as much as me, but when we came through that 2008, 2009 recession, that was, I always say that's where Dryrun came from. But the interesting thing is the businesses that kind of survived that, and even more so probably in the sort of dot-com meltdown a number of years earlier, the businesses that came through the other side just had an advantage because it just the competitive landscape, it completely changed. And so there's some, I imagine, some businesses that they'll come through, they'll be battered, they'll be bruised, they'll be missing an arm, but at some point that's when that engine's going to start going again, and there just isn't going to be that competition, and they'll have had those learnings, and like you said, refined their operations. So I suppose there is some light at the end of the tunnel for some, but there is going to be some real challenges, I know, for sure. So
yeah, look, I think economic history actually supports your thesis there, and that is, after tremendous economic declines, there tends to be a fairly protracted period of good times for the reasons you just cited. If you can survive, then the companies that are left tend to have more market to serve, and so on and so forth. And so, but you can't just survive and then hope after that. You have to not only survive, but then also have a plan for what comes next, or as best you can.
What are your thoughts on, because this is just something that dawned on me that I'm curious about. What are your thoughts like on the sort of the shopping mall or the shopping area when you could have a third of the place is basically empty? Like, where's the tipping point where I have a successful business, but are people going to come because it feels like the mall's empty? Or how do you think that's going to play out with the actual sort of real estate side?
Oh, well, that's the battleground right now. I mean, you can imagine, retailers not wanting to pay their rent when the stores were closed, and now that they're open, some of these, one of the big dust ups, for example, naming names, is the Gap. I mean, they have a lot of stores, over 1,000 stores. Most of them are in malls. Well, they got into a big legal row with one of the biggest mall operators in the US, basically saying we don't want to pay our rent because the mall
Hmm.
was closed. But even if you
Yeah.
go past closures, the retail tenants, to your point, would say to the mall operators, well, your job is to bring traffic to my store. That's why I'm in the mall. And if traffic is down, hey, I should pay less.
Yeah.
That's sort of the discussion that's going on right now. And mall operators are kind of saying, look, rent is rent is rent. And we're not here to solve everybody's problems or how your brand is doing. Other brands are doing better, other retailers are doing better. And so they're also caught in a tough spot. They have
Hmm.
their own obligations and banks to pay and employees to pay. And so here's the push and pull of this. Mall operators, I'll just say this, are trying to pivot themselves. In other words, can they, instead of that anchor tenant, that Sears store, department store that's now gone, could we turn that into a work sharing space? Could we turn it into a gym, or a retirement community, like finding other ways to utilize their space?
Yeah. Yeah. That's going to be a real challenge. And I imagine there's going to be, it's like anything else, it's ripe for innovation. Um, and there probably will be some innovation. There'll be people following on. And then I imagine there'll also be some, some big parking lots after, after a while too, where it's just some aren't going to make it. Um, so let's fast forward here. You talked a little bit about like where some of the challenges in your business. How is it like? Have you had to make any moves, any pivots? How has it affected your business now that we're into this strange kind of new world in the last 6 months?
Yeah, well, it's consumed most of my attention. I mean, thinking about, well, what happens next? What does the future really look like? I mean, we've been at this for over 17 years now. And that perspective is useful going back to the 09, 08. That's when our drops in revenue are commensurate with that. And what's helpful about that to me is I say, I've been through this. We've been through
Hmm.
this kind of tough knock. Anyway, it is causing us to say, well, where do we go next? And, at first, as an entrepreneur, I kind of go, wow, tough times, mother of invention, and it leads to good things. And disruption is good. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
fine. That's beer talk at the table. And then you go back to your desk and you sit there and go, where is the revenue going to come from?
Yeah.
What do I have to sell, and to whom shall I sell it? And these are fundamentally fundamental and questions that you've got to come to terms with. Anyway,
Hmm.
so I look at, you start, at least this is what we did. We stopped and said, well, what are we really good at? What are our capabilities? What is our position in the market? And wherever we go next, could we leverage what we know? And then thirdly, I said, we have to diversify beyond just retail. That even though that's been our stock and trade, we do analytics and extract insight. Well, we could apply that in different ways. Let's not just think about traffic and conversion data. That's just one small set of data.
Hmm.
And so we set these out as criteria for the kinds of things we ought to do next. We've come up with some ideas for different data we would analyze, and then different markets we'd go after. But then you have to chase those. You have to determine, is there a market there? If so, what does it look like? Who are the competitors? What are the players? What are the market dynamics? Where could we fit? You can imagine the list of
Yeah.
questions you really need to suss out. And so that's kind of where we're at. But I want to say this about pivoting, because it's a cool thing. I like to say, yeah, we're pivoting. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
And it sounds very B school, but it's hard as hell. If you think
Hmm.
about it, it's like taking your business and turning it in a new direction. And what you discover when you pivot is that you may not have exactly the right organization to support where you're trying to now go, that you may not have all the right people, or you might have people in the wrong spots, or not having the right skills, and so you then have to suss that out relative to who you are today. And then, well,
Yeah.
what choices so there's a hell of a lot to it. And that's after you figured out where you want to pivot to.
Yeah.
So all I
Yeah.
can say is that it's serious. You got to think about it. And it's going to be hard, and you're not likely to get it right the first time, but it's about being adaptable, trying things. And you hear fail fast and all that. Well, it's true. You got to try things, bash around until you can find a groove and get going from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always, like you said, it's always much messier than the plan, because it comes back to trying to validate it and use your staff, use your resources, and then find out you don't have the right staff, you don't have the right resources, and it just makes it really challenging. And of course, we've been through some of those little struggles and things as well, and it's always ongoing. That's interesting though, that you, because this is having a beer and too long, I guess, a couple of weeks, but sort of what I'm interested in is you starting to think, saying you may start to look outside of retail, because you're actually, and I just haven't heard you say that before, so I'm intrigued by that. But there's like you said, you're an analytics company. You can understand data. You can offer insights. You've got this expertise. And so is this, I imagine, like just this new, a little bit of burst of inspiration and innovation. I imagine that's coming from our current situation. That's forced that upon you. I'm guessing, hey?
Yeah, it's exactly right. And so this is the case where you say, wow, that pandemic thing really got us to think differently, because we likely would not have thought this way. And
Yeah.
so this is a case where there is the upside. When something really terrible is a positive catalyst, that in and of itself is a positive thing. But that doesn't mean you're going to have a happy ending or the outcome's going to be great or all the rest of it, right? So you have to keep it in perspective. But let me just address your question about getting out of retail without divulging too much of it, because it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
But let me just say this. It comes down to really narrowing your view to what the value is that you think your company is delivering.
Mm-hmm.
And we came to the realization that the real value that our customers get are the insights, not the tools, not the data, because you can buy tools are easy. Data is easy. Hard
Mm-hmm.
is extracting useful information, then ultimately actioning it. And
Yeah.
the retailer has to do that on their own. But if we could save them time, and by extension, other businesses that don't have time to collect and analyze data that would be relevant to their business, well, why couldn't I apply the same kind of thinking? And
Yeah.
so the world is full of all kinds of companies that are collecting all kinds of data. And what I'm discovering is that not too many people want to focus on what you do with that data and extracting insights, because it's hard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these data companies want to provide SaaS models and platforms where you can access data, and they'll just charge you as you go, and you take the data and do what you will with it. Well, that's fine and dandy, but that's not where the value is. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what I'm working on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this it's interesting. Well, when you start to dive in and you start getting some traction in another area here, you got to come back on and tell us all about it. So I'm gonna want to hear
Hopefully
about
I
it.
get the chance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But well, this has been terrific, Mark. I think I've taken up a lot of your time right today, but it's such an engaging conversation. I think we could probably go for hours. But is there anything you want to sort of add or mention to the people listening? Like, number one, how to get in touch with you, especially if they're in retail and have want to talk with you about some of the insights that you can offer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if anyone's interested in our work, you'll find it on headcount.com. Headcount, just like it sounds.com. And if you want to hear about the ideas and the things that we talk about, I am a featured brain trust commentator on a website called Retail Wire. And that's really the industry. It's where leading experts and touching all kinds of domains in retail speak about the topics of the day. So anyone interested in the category, that's a good place to check out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's terrific. I'm excited for the some of the new challenges that you seem to be meeting head on, and always our conversations are always so terrific, and I've really enjoyed the time. So I really appreciate you joining me today, Mark, and hopefully we'll do this again in the future, outside of publicly with other people, not just us on the deck, which we'll have to do real soon. So thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you, Blaine, and keep up the terrific work, focusing on cash flow. Businesses it's got to be in the soul, man. It really does. It seems obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me until probably about 5 or 6 years ago that a switch turned in my head and I went, it's all about cash flow, dummy. and it really made a difference.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No,
love the great work you and your team are doing.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words, and of course, anyone out there, if you're looking for some help managing your cash flow and taking control of it, just head over to dryrun.com and you can visit us there and chat with us there. We'd love to talk with you. Thanks so much, everyone.